I know, the board docs thing, yeah.
Perfectly fine.
Hi.
Well, anyway, Happy New Year.
Greg's looking at me.
Same to you, and you look better.
Yeah, it's getting better.
Good.
Ups and downs. I'm going to be till March to get a little better, but it's not looking bad. The scar's small and maybe long, but it's small.
Have you heard from
Brother-in-law
Veronica?
had an accident with a mixer. It was for
Eliminate.
11
We're just like, that's my shirt.
because she's fighting over the what she should be. And I husband said, tell me if you want to do something.
I'll call the meeting to order. We have all of our trustees present except Veronica Gallardo, who we expect very soon. And welcome back after the holidays. I hope everyone had a great holiday. I know it's always a bit of a shock to come back, and I think that's probably the case for everyone. But we're happy to be here. We move on to item 2.4, which is items to be taken out of order, which takes us swiftly to Craig Price, who is visiting us today to give us Brown Act and Ethics Annual Review.
Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. Here I am once again, as Cornelia pointed out, for once in open session, not in closed session, so I'm glad we can do it that way. You know, the Brown Act is, over the years, has come to be something that's been viewed publicly by the public, by boards, by prosecutor's office, much more seriously than it was in years past. As an example of that, one of my partners, a fellow my age, who's a former school board member on a local school board, found an entry from his father's journal from 1958. Now, the Brown Act was passed in 1953. And so the entry in this journal that he sent me the other day referred to his father was a board member at the Hope School District. He's a prominent physician. And he kept an everyday journal. To Hope School at 6 o'clock. Rip and Elizabeth not there. So Ralph and I took Helen and Margaret out to steak dinner at the Green Gables and held our meeting there. Before, during, and after the dinner. 2 cocktails, $11 cost to each of us, $22 total. So that's how they did it then, folks. And I'm not here to recommend that tradition be carried on. And of course, I wouldn't have commented on that, but for the fact that all of the principles are long gone, as well as the applicable statute of limitations from some 50 years before. So we've done this a few times in the past, so I'm not here to walk you through the same material that I've previously covered, not only because I don't want to be repetitive, quite frankly, I think from having worked with your board quite closely over the last several years, I think you do an excellent job in adherence. And the questions that I've received are fewer and fewer because you know your responsibilities, and to the best of my knowledge, you carry them out faithfully. And if there's a need for a stop sign to be put up by someone, you do it on your own. So in the last few years, I've had very few questions. But I do want to take you through a few things. And I thought a logical place to start would be just to cover a couple of issues that from this, some of the biggest issues that we had come up. And some of these things touch on not only the Brown Act, but also on board ethics and on conflicts of law, which is all tied in with board ethics. So they're one and the same, and maybe just a little bit of the Public Record Act. One of the most troubling things for boards, which I saw too much of last year, was when a hard decision had to be made in closed session, a personnel type decision. And so an action was taken as a result, labor. Then everybody naturally wanted to know, well, what happened? What was the reason for that? You've got to tell us something. And of course, the question becomes not only should you, but could you disclose anything about what the reasons for that action would be? And we've all read instances in the paper over the years where something happens to somebody and of course we wonder why. Well, I wonder what happened. And you'll see all the comments on the blogs and so on. Oh, there must have been there must have been that. So I'm wondering if any of you have any ideas on whether you think that there's something that a board or a board member can do or say that would alleviate some of that pressure and some of that consternation, because you as a board in this hypothetical were confident that you had very good reasons for the action that was taken. But everybody that you're talking to in the newspapers are all saying, why did they do it? Why did they do it? So-and-so was wonderful. I'm just wondering, Socratically speaking, if any of you have any thoughts on whether there's anything that could be done or that ought to be done in a situation like that.
Well, I was going to suggest, I can think of some situations where there is an agreement with regard to a personnel decision, and that agreement includes a statement to the press that all parties are satisfied with. Now, I leave it to you to remind everyone how that fits into the confidentiality of closed sessions. But that's one thing that comes to my mind.
And that's a good answer. And commonly, there is some sort of a statement that goes along with it. But as we all know, very often those statements are very bland in their content. So I think one consideration certainly is that you're pretty much barred from dealing with any of the specifics, because the Brown Act absolutely prohibits board members from disclosing anything that was covered in a closed session. And the only information which you collectively would have had that would have led to a decision occurred in closed session. And so it's not just that you want to keep it secret because you're afraid of getting sued, but rather you're prohibited from law, by law, from saying anything about that. That doesn't make it easy, and so I guess I would suggest that by and large there's very little that can be done. What I have seen done in a few situations is that the board president, for example, or the superintendent, depending on what the situation is, prepares some sort of a statement to the effect of assuring the public that there were reasons for the action that was taken, but because of strict legal requirements, you're forbidden from going beyond that, you know, blah, blah, blah. But in some instances, it's better than the standard, we can't discuss a personnel matter. So that was one thing that I became particularly involved in last year. Then I was going to mention something about conflicts. And of course, your board policies and your ARs are full of different material about conflicts. But one thing that we haven't talked about in the past is a particular type of conflict. Because what is most familiar, and I think most obvious, has to do with financial conflicts under the Political Reform Act and under Government Code Section 1090 having to do with contracts. But there's also something called a common law conflict requirement. And what that means is where over the years there are cases that have gone to court, and through the law of precedents in this state, there have been various pronouncements that regulate not only financial matters, but other types of matters, specifically where a board member has an interest of some type that would appear to prevent that board member from applying his board role with absolute fidelity and zeal to his job as a board member. And again, we saw particular instances of that, not here, but elsewhere in this county, that involved fairly serious matters last year. So, for example, if there is, well, this is almost an obvious action. If there's some sort of a matter before the board that involves someone who has been a colleague or just a personal friend, and it might involve a contract, it could involve use of the facility, it could involve any number of things. Would there be a conflict of interest, and if so, what should a board member do? Well, in the classic sense, because the board member wasn't going to secure any financial gain or otherwise benefit, there wouldn't be a conventional conflict of interest. Certainly there would be the appearance of a conflict, which in many people's minds elevates to a similar role of importance. But that would also constitute what could be determined to be a common law conflict of interest. Now, I'll just take it one more step further with something that that I think is a little more difficult to answer. And that is, and this ties in not only to conflict, but to ethics, board ethics. Let's just say that you have a proposal before you that winds up for some reason at the board level, where you have a speaker that's coming or wants to come and speak on a topic that's very controversial. And to pick an example, let's just say they want to speak on the advisability of rolling back the Paris Accords, the global warming treaty that the United States entered into with many, many other countries not long ago. And let's say that a board member is a member of a nonprofit organization which promotes taking significant steps in order to curb global warming. Would any of you have any thoughts as to whether or not that would fall into the same type of what I'll call either common law conflict or appearance of a conflict, such that the board member should abstain or recuse themselves from participating?
Do you mean in terms of the decision to have
Yeah.
this person speak or not speak?
Yes. And of course, we've all seen examples of this kind of thing, especially in the last couple of years, where post-secondary institutions across the country have faced controversies about controversial speakers coming. And so there are all these free speech issues and ethics issues. But in terms of a board member that has specific ties to an advocacy group that opposes what a particular speaker is going to promote, what should that board member do?
Specific ties, I mean, that's such a broad topic that all of us would have a view one way or the other.
Well, let's just say that you're the president of a local nonprofit organization that is actively promoting the curbing of global warming. You know, start local, think, whatever that saying was from a few years ago. And so you're well known for your views in wanting to promote curbing global warming. And in fact, your group has taken a strong position on that before the Paris get-together. And now you have somebody, hypothetically, let's say, from the new administration that's coming in and wants to address the college community about why the Paris Accord should be scrapped. Should that board member participate in the decision as to whether or not that person should come or not? What do you think, Jonathan?
As long as they fully disclose that that's their situation, it shouldn't be a direct conflict? I mean, if you don't make money as president of a nonprofit board, there's no direct financial gain?
Well, that's absolutely true from the standpoint of the kind of classic conflicts that are enshrined in your board policies and so on, but I'm talking about a different type of a
But
conflict.
ethically, yeah.
Well, to answer the question, I don't know that there is a strict answer because there certainly isn't any court case that has gone there. But you have a board policy, 2715, that talks about promoting the interest of the college and the community as a whole, exercising independent judgment without bias in favor of private interests or partisan political groups. So the question would be whether or not, given the board member's active and visible role in an advocacy group, however they might like to participate, would that undermine the integrity of the decision that the rest of the board might make or undermine the integrity of the college? I don't know. It's not imponderable. We could ponder it all day and I think come up with different answers. And sometimes answers are driven by what it is that we'd want to do in that circumstance. But there we are. Okay, a couple other things having to do with new laws. I have a whole memo that I'll be sending along to Dr. Beebe that outlines many, many new laws affecting educational institutions that have gone into effect this year. But in terms of things that affect you directly, there's really only a couple of things, and I'll just comment on them briefly. And that is, when it comes to people making public comments at your meetings, I don't remember if you have a 2-minute limit or a 3-minute limit. What is it? 5-minute limit?
5 unless there's a great number of people, and then we go to 2.
The new law, effective January 1, states that where you have a non-English speaking commenter that is addressing the board by way of a translator, that the amount of allowable time is doubled.
Which is exactly what we've done in the past.
Ahead of the curve.
Excellent.
I knew you'd say that.
No, you knew the legislature would say that.
I guess the message here is that we don't need the legislature to provide us with common sense approaches sometimes.
Guess that you could expand that to a lot of other things you don't need the legislature.
Yeah.
You know, over 100,000 sections in the education code, not including all these new ones. And then, of course, the legislature espouses local control. Well, we're sort of limited in terms of what's left over, but be that as it may. The other new law that isn't going to come up very often, but that you should be aware of, has to do with board action regarding executive compensation. And it provides, if there's something on the agenda that asks the board to approve something, that before the board votes on the recommendation that is before you, that there needs to be a public disclosure orally of what it is that is being recommended and a summary of what that is. And this is another one of those many things that derives from the city of Bell and, you know, the corruption that went on there. Okay, well, let's just spend a short time on the Brown Act itself.
Professor, could I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
My question is, if we have a scenario where the board is taking action on something, and in all innocence, they move forward with that decision, and after the fact, they discover that there may have been a perceived or an actual conflict of interest, or there was something else that wasn't quite what they would have decided had they had that information at the time. Given that situation, what would be the proper procedure moving forward with that in terms of either disclosure or a revote, or how would you advise us in proceeding with something like
Well,
that?
interestingly enough, I had exactly that same situation happen this past year somewhere else. If you become aware of that, such a situation, then it should be re-agendized for the following meeting in a two-step process. Part one would be to rescind the action that was taken during the preceding meeting, and item number two would be to do it all over again.
Okay.
And when those mistakes are made, which are almost inevitable sometimes, it's much better, in my experience, to self-identify and do it yourself rather than waiting for somebody on the outside to bring it to your attention, because it makes everyone look like hell otherwise.
Yeah.
Can I follow up? I'd like to go back to your conflict discussion, kick it around a bit more. I'm curious. I have great faith that our board members always have in mind what they consider to be the best interests of the college when they make those decisions. So many times for me, this has more to do with possible perception of someone else outside of the college, or perhaps even within the college, that, you know, there was a reason they look at it differently, from a different lens. So this perception thing can get tricky. And so I'm curious, to go back to your hypothetical, let's say the person who was in charge of the global warming, pro-global warming nonprofit group decided that there could be a perception here of conflict of interest, so I'm going to recuse myself from voting. What other steps would that person take? Would they not discuss the matter when the board discusses it as well, or would they feel that they could advocate for their point of view on this and then withdraw from the vote?
As you know, that's a good question. As you know, if it was a financial conflict, it would require recusal and withdrawal from the room and no participation even in the discussion. When it comes to something like this, the requirement would be less, and I think it would be more of a judgment call. The board member might say, I think many of you are perfectly aware of what my feelings are on this particular topic. Whether or not I nevertheless would support the speaker coming to our campus, I'm not going to participate in the vote-in because I don't want the action by the rest of you board members to be compromised at all by my participation. Beyond that, could the board member say, you know, my strong feelings are such that, you know, free speech or no free speech, I don't think we ought to have that type of thing because there's going to be disruption on the campus and blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure that would be illegal, but I think it would be ill-advised. So I think if the person is going to abstain, that they should really not make their views known. Not only not vote, but also not publicly, as a board member, make their views known.
And in the financial arena that you alluded to, there's got to be gray stuff going on here as well, shading into perception. Can you perhaps draw some parallels or lines or hypotheticals that illuminate those gray areas? I know.
Well, I could.
Tough question right there.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, I've been living some of these things, so I have certain things that come to mind. For example, particularly in areas with limited population, such as Santa Barbara and various school districts, there are people who are on the board and they have relatives that are employed by whatever the district is where they work. So let's just say, for example, that a board member is called upon to vote for a salary increase for a group of employees that includes a spouse. That became a topic for a grand jury report this last year and a matter of considerable controversy. And the question is, well, either should or can that board member participate in the vote? It seems to me very clearly that the board member should not participate in the vote because at the very least, there's an appearance of a conflict of interest. But there are also rules that allow, the best example is if the spouse is a teacher and it's a collective bargained agreement where there's a 3% wage increase, the board member is allowed to participate in the vote of a large group like that is collectively bargained. But then it gets into the gray area where we're talking about a group of unrepresented employees. So there are situations, and the one I had was definitely in the gray area, and the district attorney also became involved. So that's one example that comes to the top of my mind. And by all means, I'm not going to be up here very much longer, but if any of the others of you have any questions about the Brown Act or these related topics, then feel free to speak up. You know, one of the things that I have been asked several times in the past, or I've heard from the public, is, oh, you shouldn't discuss thus and such at a special meeting. That needs to be at a regular meeting. Special meetings are for special things, like study sessions. And that's just inaccurate. With one exception, you can call a special meeting and discuss anything you want, as long as it's properly agendized. The only exception is another one of those City of Bell limitations, which says that you cannot take action on executive compensation at a special meeting. And that, of course, is because you notice a special meeting on 24 hours notice, and they don't want people to sneak in executive compensation without having the full 3 days. Now, is it better on issues particularly of significant importance to notice things 72 hours out? Well, of course it is, because that way the whole system is more transparent. And certainly, if you have an item that is going to be of widespread public interest, and you know ahead, well ahead, that you are going to take care of it at a special meeting because it's going to require a lengthy discussion and deliberation, then there isn't anything that would stop you from noticing it much longer than the 24-hour requirement. In other words, you can do the regular 72-hour notice in many instances, and that ought to avoid any type of criticism. I know you're all familiar with the law that requires that not only your board be Brown Act compliant, but that any committee that your board forms be Brown Act compliant, with only one exception, and that's the ad hoc committee consisting of 2 or 3 board members only. So if you wanted to form a committee to study some discrete subject that you are going to bring back to the board, not a standing committee, an ad hoc committee, you said, okay, well, we want to have 2 board members get together with Dr. Beebe, and we're going to form this ad hoc committee. Would that be okay? No, because regardless of whether it makes sense or not, Dr. Beebe can't be on it because the Brown Act says ad hoc committee of board members only. So what's the fix? The 2 board members get together and they get the information and input they want by having Dr. Beebe or whomever else present. And that's not a sneak around, it's a logical part of the Brown Act that allows ad hoc committees. And the justification for this is because the committee is only temporary, it's for a single purpose, and it's going to bring back recommendations to the entire board, which will be publicly aired.
And it kind of informs the committee to get some input from non-members of the committee.
That's right.
Yeah.
Another one that comes up quite a bit has to do with dealing with public comments. Sometimes people say things which almost cry out for a response. And at least some boards are of the belief that they can never respond. They have to sit there mum, sometimes looking, almost silly. Somebody's made this preposterous allegation or challenge to them, and they say, okay, well, thank you very much. And it's like, if you're watching on the video, is that all there is? Well, for the most part, the practice of not responding to board comments is a practical one, not a legal one, and that is that it is not designed to be something that's going to lead to a board discussion, and there's only a limited amount of time that is set for it. The item isn't agendized for a conversation among board members, but in specific situations, and I think you have to use common sense, there isn't anything that prohibits the board president, any board member for that matter, or Dr. Beebe from saying, well, let me just comment. I want everyone to know that what was just stated is incorrect. And in fact, this topic is going to be coming back for a discussion in a month or something like that. I think, but obviously one has to use discretion. So in closed session, discussions of, well, let's talk about, go back to the controversial speaker. Let's say you have a controversial speaker request and you're really uncomfortable about talking about whether this particular individual who represents this particular group ought to come on campus because you know there's going to be an outcry from your student body. And you also know that if you agendize it and have a discussion, you're going to fill up this room and people are going to have the placards and don't let them come. And many of you might have strong feelings about it. So in the interest of safeguarding that kind of public outcry, do you suppose that you could go into closed session and at least have a discussion of whether or not you want to allow the person to speak at the college, to the college community?
You can't, right?
Pardon me?
You wouldn't be able to?
No,
Yeah. Yeah, that's,
no.
yeah.
You can't, because there's no exception to the Brown Act, and when it comes to personnel, for example, the protection that's in place that allows you to discuss personnel matters in closed session isn't for your benefit, it's for the employee who is under discussion. So if you want to talk about a potential reorganization of particular departments or something like that, and understandably, you don't want to rock the boat by talking about 4 different options and upset, ungodly number of people. You want to talk about what seems to make the most sense before bringing it forward for an open board discussion. Would that be okay? No, because the protection is for individual employees whose privacy would be subject to violation if it was talked about. So you can't do that. Now, what about compensation and salary? If in closed session somebody says, I think that we ought to give the whole group a 3% increase because they've really worked hard this year, or some particular individual a 3% increase, can you go into closed session and talk about that?
I think you can go into closed session with the view of discussing interest group negotiations, a part of which might be a salary increase. I don't see any problem with that.
But the only, you touched on it, you're right, the only basis for doing it is through labor negotiations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The point of labor negotiations is that the person who you have designated to go out and talk to either a bargaining group, the unrepresented employees, or even your superintendent is a conduit who is coming back to you and saying, here's what I'm recommending, but you can't go into the closed session and have a discussion otherwise. It's got to be through the auspices of the labor negotiator. I'm sorry, forgive me.
And Craig, you're just referring right now to a labor negotiator who has earlier been appointed as to that role.
Absolutely.
That's first step.
And that applies to the labor groups, and it applies to managerial employees as well. Somebody has to be designated and be the go-between. Otherwise, it's verboten. And then, unless you have questions, I think the last one I'm going to mention that sometimes, including here once upon a time, leads to confusion is reporting out of closed session. What is it that has to be reported out? The only things that have to be reported out are the things that are specifically described in one of the Brown Act sections. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a closed session with your lawyer to talk about settling some particular pending action that you might have at some point, and you authorize your lawyer to go to the other side and offer $5,000 to settle it. Does that have to be reported out? No, it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't have to be reported out is because it's not on the list of things that a particular Brown Act section says needs to be reported out. But if you approve a settlement that your lawyer brings you and the other parties already signed it, then you need to report on that because it's a final act. But until that occurs, it's only preliminary, and you don't know what's going to happen, whether it's going to be accepted. And it would make no sense to have to give away your bargaining position publicly to somebody on the other side that is going to know exactly what you're talking about. But that's just one of many examples of things that you do in closed session or that you might do in closed session that need not be reported out, and there are a number of them. So, unless you have some questions, Peter.
I've always been concerned that the state legislature, in its efforts in the early 1950s to make absolutely everything transparent, it probably was a reflection of what had happened before that was not so transparent. But why did the legislature apply this rule, this Brown Act, only to all of the agencies in the state of California except itself?
Well, what's the old saying? You know, do as I say, not as I do. That's a very good question, and it ought not to be that way. And the model, FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act at the federal level, is essentially the same thing. In the hallowed halls of Congress, we're not seeing any sort of requirements at all of public disclosures in terms of what goes on. But certainly in all the executive branches, they face the same kind of requirements. Maybe you should make an effort to change that, Peter.
I did pose that question, and I apologize for the rhetorical nature of the question, but I did pose it to a member of the state legislature whose response was intriguing to me. He said, well, if it applied to us, we wouldn't get nothing done. And I thought about that for a second and said, you know, do you think that might apply to any number of other subordinate agencies as well? He did not answer.
Pretty much, you know, we've learned over the years, you know, how to get along, but the Brown Act does require boards from time to time to face, you know, very uncomfortable situations. And occasionally, some of those situations are silly, and there's just no cure. So just one example is if there is a search going on, let's just say for your superintendent, and you have a number of people that you're going to interview, and you want to formulate search questions. And you obviously don't want those questions to be known by all the candidates, although if it was Hillary, she would have gotten them. But other than that,
Bad. That's just...
it doesn't reflect my political view. I wasn't planning on saying that. But the Brown Act simply does not allow the board out of the public eye to meet as a whole in order to formulate questions. So a minority of you have to be tasked with doing that kind of thing. And it's just simply the way it is, although some people have tried to tell me in the past that it's perfectly fine to do otherwise, but that's not so. So anyway, thank you all once again.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Craig.
Nicely done.
Okay, moving along, we do not have minutes, oh, we have public comment. Angie, I'm guessing no one? No public comment. Approval of minutes, we do not have minutes this time, so we move on to consideration of a naming opportunity with Melissa Marino, and is Jeff's green? Yes.
Yes.
You're here too.
Melissa and Jeff are both here.
Anthony,
Yes.
you want to comment?
Yes. This is an extraordinary opportunity for the college, and I'm going to let Melissa and Jeff describe the structure of this. And what we're looking to do now at this particular moment is just have a discussion. We really wanted the board to be sure they understand what's involved with all of this. We're not looking for any kind of action at this particular moment. That would come at a subsequent board meeting. So, Melissa, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent President Dr. Beebe. Thank you all for participating in the all-campus kickoff today. That was really fun to see you there and interacting with us and supporting all of us, so thank you for that. And also thank you today for your consideration of this new naming opportunity. I'd like to take a few minutes to tell you the story of how we got here and then turn it over to Jeff Green to help us with next steps. So this is one of those moments in time where I feel very grateful for the relationships that we've cultivated in the business division, and in particular with Jack and Julie Nadel. So you can change the slide. Next. Yeah, there's Jack and Julie. My first introduction to Jack was in 2013 in his home for a casual visit to prepare for him to be featured in the Scheinfeld Center's Enlightened Entrepreneurship Series, moderated by our Business Administration Chair, Bonnie Chavez. Jack was an absolutely fascinating man with a very strong sense of humor. And when I met him, he was just about to turn 90. And what struck me more than anything about Jack was how relevant his voice was in today's entrepreneurship and business world. There wasn't anything old or stuffy about him. He was as sharp and funny as anyone I had ever met. And thankfully, we've captured his story. Resonate with students and faculty for years to come. He became enamored with our college, our students, and the business division, and was in particular thrilled to see our practical approach to education and how successful we were in growing global business professionals and entrepreneurs. We also honored him as the first recipient of the Elna Award, which was given to him by Elna Scheinfeld, to recognize his outstanding contributions as a global leader in entrepreneurship and business. Jack and I also had a mutual friend, Amber Sims, who was once a student in our business division and now runs her own successful marketing firm. She helped Jack launch his new book, The Evolution of an Entrepreneur, yes, at age 90, and a major social media campaign. He was a tweeter and a blogger, and I'm so grateful to Amber for championing the Nadel's support of SBCC and the business division. As we began having the conversation with the Nadels about a large donation, Jack passed away in his sleep only a few days before we were supposed to meet for lunch. I wrote a very heartfelt letter to Julie Nadel expressing my condolences, and of course, I canceled the lunch. It was such a sad time for me and for Bonnie and for our students who had just watched Jack's video interview in my class. But Julie wrote back. And she not only invited Bonnie and I to the family service, which was a beautiful and intimate celebration of Jack's incredible life, but she insisted on keeping the lunch meeting. She was absolutely intent on moving forward with Jack's wish to help the division and support SBCC. So this gives you a little bit of an insight as to who Julie is. Julie's an incredible woman, and while she's a talented businesswoman and entrepreneur, she's sweet, kind, smart, real, she is also very tough and resilient, and I feel I have a lot to learn from Julie. My working meetings with her have been incredibly exciting, fun, and future-thinking, and I am so looking forward to working with her this year to make these things happen. Jack was a very lucky man to have Julie by his side. With this endowment and the naming of the division as the Jack and Julie Nadel School of Business and Entrepreneurship, we will not only bring attention to the great work of the entire business division, but we will ensure Jack's legacy lives on, instilling wisdom and confidence in our future entrepreneurs and business students. Thank you. Jeff?
Good afternoon, members of the board. Good to see you again today after today's kickoff. So really what I wanted to add to Melissa's story is something that I did say to the full campus community today, which is that this is, to my mind, the ideal version of how we could do this. And given that there are multiple opportunities like this, that the partnership between the division faculty, between Melissa as dean, the Nadels, and the foundation, I think we have the opportunity to be thinking about how these kinds of community connections can be built. I want to say that this particular gift, in addition to being an incredibly generous one, the Nadels were immediately open to what we asked, which was that the most valuable dollar is the most flexible dollar. And they immediately understood that, really intuitively, and they agreed to an endowment that was completely unrestricted within the business division. So what we have before us is the offer of $1 million to come to the college to be used annually at the discretion of the school leadership along with the college leadership, and to really go for whatever is needed at the time. And that's an incredibly valuable gift. It's beyond the prescribed gift to the we trust you and your leadership style gift, and that's what we tried to cultivate here. The naming opportunity that we're proposing, that we proposed to Julie, and that we're asking you to consider, and I know we'll vote and talk more about this in a couple of weeks, would be a naming of the actual program. So we're talking about something that essentially doesn't have precedent at SBCC. The closest analog would be the Scheinfeld Center, which was, of course, created with an endowed gift. This would be an existing set of academic programs, and we would be naming a school of those connected programs after the donor in honor of this gift. To make it even more interesting, and I think another really good, ingenious way of doing this, and I credit Melissa with this thinking, was that there are dollars available to do the actual physical manifestation to acknowledge the gift that are already in hand. So rather than taking from the gift that is coming from the Dells, there are some grant dollars available which could do the fairly minimal but nonetheless important remodeling of the lobby of the BC building with the naming opportunity, make it more usable for students in the entrepreneurship program and the business courses, and have that be the place where someone would walk in, they would see that, and that would be the physical manifestation of the gift. And my last comment is simply that in addition to this being a model of how we can all do this well together, I think there are going to be more opportunities in the future. I think the creativity shown by the staff and faculty leadership here is really important. And ultimately, I think it opens the door for a conversation we probably all need to have that I know that your board hasn't had the opportunity to have in recent years, which is what kind of naming opportunities should we in the foundation as well as all staff and faculty be pursuing in our community, because I believe there is an incredible potential out there that we simply haven't even begun to explore. And we need to be clear on what we want as a college, and what does the college need and what does the district need, and that would ultimately guide anything I or my team did in seeking that out. So I look forward to that as well, as far as what that menu of options might be. And if there's any questions, I know Melissa and I can answer them now, or we can talk in the interim. Within, of course, the Brown Act restrictions. And
So the board policy that we have related to naming opportunities, we reviewed, and it requires that we assemble an ad hoc committee for the purpose of reviewing the naming opportunity itself. And specifically, it calls for a faculty member to be involved on the ad hoc committee, the superintendent president to be there, to have one of the trustees be involved in that committee. And we did meet at the business communications foyer area that's of interest, and Jeff discussed, what was being asked of us. Vice President Jonathan Aboud was there, or was engaged in, we'll say, via telephone. And we had a good discussion of what was involved with all of that. So I feel good about that conversation. I think I'll let you comment, Jonathan, about whatever you have questions about or thoughts on.
I just think this is an incredible opportunity and a great precedent to, a good way to try it out this time, and then we can get this experience and move on and do it more. So now we know how to do it, and we've had that one instance that you can go to the next person and say, these people did this, you can do this now. So I think this is a great idea.
So any questions or further discussion about this topic?
Thumbs up. It's great.
So the full documents related to this particular naming opportunity will be forthcoming, and we'll have those to be able to present to you at I think we're looking at the next board meeting. And so we'll have all of those signed and everything, but we just wanted to make sure that we give you proper time and consideration to be able to look at this in some kind of detail.
And we can put more detail into the report that we submit to you, but I'll just seed the conversation a bit briefly and say that some of the things to think about are, you always want to make sure that before you offer something like a naming opportunity, that you're receiving something of value that you believe warrants that. And so these are by definition larger gifts, ideally more flexible gifts, ideally the kind that you are seeking and asking for. They're not donor directed so much as simply donors stepping forward to support the work that the college directs. And so that's what we're trying to craft here. And ultimately that scale of what's possible is what we need to talk about. We do have some precedent, but it's been a while. We probably have less than a dozen named facilities and programs on our campus, so there's opportunity, and those have happened over a very long period of time. Some of them honorifics, meaning they were done by simply to honor or memorialize someone, and a smaller number that were actually done in response to generosity, private gifts. So we just want to make sure that whatever precedent we set, every time we do this, it is a precedent, and we do it in the way that's best for the college and the students, of course.
Well, I'd certainly like to say thank you to the Nadells first, of course, and Melissa and Jeff and Anthony, Jonathan, of course. It's just wonderful when people make these kinds of gifts to us, and I am intrigued. Not only, I mean, the naming opportunity is an honor we give, but the support of the programs, to me, is a very exciting opportunity because it helps us weather the storm of up and down in terms of our funding, and helps us have programs that have those additional resources to innovate and meet the needs of our students as they change over time. So I think it's a very exciting opportunity and very grateful.
Also say we have a real champion in Julie, because we asked her permission before we invoked her name today to 700, or how many people were gathered today, and of course tonight, and she not only is of course doing this, but she's very happy to be an advocate for others to do it as well, and that's equally important, to have donors speaking to their own peers about the value of it.
That's wonderful. Veronica, were you?
I just wanted to add, I mean, Jeff, obviously, you know, there are plenty of organizations in our city where people can give. And so I think that what's amazing here is that they choose to give because they have a relationship, and they're now a part of our community. And I think that that's a credit to the work that you guys have done, and just brings the humanity back into what we're here for and fulfilling that mission. So I just want to say thank you, because people can choose to give in plenty of places in the city, but they chose to further a relationship and continue with us. So I think that's awesome. So thank you.
Good point. Thank you.
So Marcia, can
Well-
I just ask
Marty?
just a quick question? I mean, I think this whole thing is wonderful. Obviously, it's great. But do you think I need to look at the board policy? I mean, we went over all those board policies, and I'm not conjuring up what that one looks like. But do you think it's adequate for, to give us some parameters for future gifts? And I don't even know what it looks like for some reason. So.
It's a
I
pretty
know it's
long,
that's a separate discussion that we need to have, I think.
it's a long policy, and it
Yeah.
does have a lot of detail, but I think that Jeff has raised an interesting question about maybe a thought process and a discussion we would want to have separately about what is most important to us. What are our priorities there that we can work with Jeff on?
And at various times in our respective histories, this has been done. So I have documents going back a couple decades where at different times levels were set with dollar amounts. In fact, Dr. Gaskin and I, before her retirement, had a conversation about this. In fact, when these most recent policies, I believe it's 6620, were passed in October of 15, we had a conversation about leaving that door open. And so you can see there's no prescriptive, those are meant to outlast the particular year. But ultimately, you do have, of course, the authority and actually the responsibility to set what do you want to see in order to offer naming opportunities. So entirely at the trustee's discretion.
Peter?
Will we have an opportunity to thank for this wonderful gift?
Yes. Julie is two things. One is part of the pledge agreement we've drafted with her. She would like to be a speaker, and we would like her to be a speaker at a dedication event in the fall of this year. And she, of course, has also put out there an open offer to talk about this with others. I'm sure she would welcome an invitation to stand here and visit with the board as well. So I don't know, Melissa, if you've had other conversation with her of that, but short answer is yes.
And you'll all be invited to the foundation party.
That's right.
It's good.
Yes, there will be opportunities to celebrate this and frankly, to use that opportunity to get the word out about, Santa Barbara City College is a place where people invest million-dollar gifts, and that's an important thing to be understood in the broader community.
Well, if Julie would like to come, we would be very grateful to have her,
Wonderful.
I'm sure.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks.
Okay, the next item we have covered, the Brown Act and Ethics Annual Review. 6.2, this is a procedural issue. Our current policy calls for us to review the numerical limit in the board policy on international students. 5012 is the board policy in January. And because in our retreat, we're going to have a broader discussion of the size of the college, the mix of students, and related issues, thought it would be appropriate to postpone this. It's not a critical issue that has to happen in January, hadn't happened that way before. And so I wanted to be sure the board felt comfortable with that, so we put it on for, it is for action. But is any, let me see, I guess we'll go with a motion first to delay consideration of that into February.
I'll move to delay.
Jonathan, second. And then any discussion, questions?
It seems like you're asking us to delay in order that our decision may be better informed.
Exactly.
And I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
But I do wonder if we shouldn't put in the date and delay till, postpone till.
We have said in here until February 25th, so that's a perfectly good date. And if
Okay.
we choose to, for some reason, to lengthen it, we can always revisit, so.
Okay. Can
Till
we add
February
that to the
25th.
motion then?
Yes, we
Yeah,
can add that to the motion. Peter, okay?
Artie, are you suggesting that we write in there for discussion on February 10th and then action on the 25th so that people know? Is that, or are you just
No,
fine
I'm
with
just-
action, period?
Review the item and
We get
postpone
an
this
end
item
date.
till the 25th.
Yeah,
And that's fine.
we're delaying to the 25th.
Mhm.
That, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Now we come to the consent agenda, and the process here is we have really only, have I skipped something?
Resolution.
Oh, my God, I'm sorry, Jonathan. I did not mean to do that. Resolution number 17, and this is 6.3, it's support for faculty diversity efforts. And I know Jonathan had a particular role in bringing this forward, so you may want to make comments, and Anthony as well, if you want to comment first.
Yeah, well, with the changing demographics that we have in the population, and in particular our student body, there's a significant body of research that shows that if you have an individual that is before you as an individual student, and you can relate to that student based on your ethnic experiences, that you as an individual student will do better because of that relationship. And there's all kinds of studies that show that this is true. Institutions across the United States are moving to try to diversify their faculty and their staff as far as that goes. And I was pleased that Vice President Aboud brought this particular resolution forward because it really supports all of those efforts, that research body, to be able to help us diversify our faculty and staff. And you know, I'll let you talk, Jonathan, whatever else you want to say about that. But
So thank you, Dr. B, for supporting this. And this issue has been something on my mind since I was a student myself. only 3 years ago. But it was an issue at the UC when I was there, and when I decided to run, we had these trustee orientation sessions, leading up to the election to make sure whoever won was ready to go. Those were very good, and one of the presentations was about the the demographics of the faculty and staff at the college. And from seeing that then, it was obviously very different than the composition of the student body. And that, to me spoke that we need to be very active in addressing that, desynchronization of the demographics. So and then when we went to the conference in November, the annual trustees conference, this was a topic that was at the conference that a couple of us went to the presentation about from the chancellor's office. So I think this is, especially now, as it says in the let it further be resolved, that we've had the SERP go into effect and a significant number of people retire. We're going to be doing some new hires, so I think a commitment to faculty diversity in light of that is appropriate and something that could make SBCC a greater college. So yeah, that's basically it. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Well, perhaps we could go with a motion and a second, and then if anyone else has comments, suggestions, or so forth, we'll go. So, motion to approve the resolution?
I so move.
So move. And Peter, are you seconding?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, any comments, suggestions? Peter?
There's some language that I would suggest we change of no particular moment aside from the potential for leading to a misunderstanding. In the let it further be resolved, the Santa Barbara Community College District Board of Trustees, I would say instead of supports all efforts, just supports efforts by the superintendent president to diversify our staff. When you say all, you're so inclusive as to potentially abrogate the board's obligation for oversight. We would still retain the responsibility to look at every action and say that this fits, as opposed to it being outside those parameters. And further, I think that we should not identify our current superintendent president, although it is my wish that he stay here for at least 150 years. But this should apply to anybody who is in that seat, as opposed to just one individual. So the friendly amendment is offered in support of the motion, not to set it aside. I think it is a genuinely effective and heartfelt statement by the Board of Trustees in support of diversity, and that's precisely where we should be.
So you're proposing this amendment, and Jonathan, is that?
Oh, yes, all good.
You're good? I'm wondering, we also have a kind of a time reference in the reference to the SERP, and I understand why that's there, because it is an opportunity that is fairly unique, but I think we also envisioned this kind of resolution to be ongoing. So should we say something to that effect?
I see what you're saying. You're suggesting that we add to this, that it's effective now, given this circumstance, but in addition, it should be effective as a future goal.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of similar to what you were saying about we don't name people right now. We're
Right.
expressing our long-term support. Craig?
I question the need to mention the SERP at all. I mean, this is a policy and the way we look at opportunities, and if it's ongoing, I don't know why that's in there.
You mean?
I'm not trying to be negative on doing this. What I'm trying to say is I don't think it should even be there. I don't think it belongs there. It just clutters it up. That's only my opinion.
Is it possible edit, in light of what you're saying, it could be a period right after our staff and faculty, and delete the rest of that sentence.
What do you think, Jonathan?
I mean, I think it is valuable since it is a big change that's never happened in the past, recent times. Maybe we can say especially in light of, but in the long term, something like that.
Diversify our faculty, our staff and faculty.
And then you'd put a period, and then
Period.
especially in light of, and then going to effect, comma, but also in the long term. That's not as eloquent as if I had more time to.
Okay, who's our eloquent expert here?
You could say, you could put a prequel to it or a suffix to the whole whereas statement. This statement was the opportunity to pass this, at this time, this policy number at this time, it came to the forefront due to this, opportunity. And that's just giving, a reason what prompted the board to consider and do the policy. I don't like having it in the same, where it's at. But if you were involved in putting it together and wanting it to happen, I could see how that would formulate, and it would be hard to change your mind. I just think in future years, somebody's going to have to revise the policy the way it's written.
Oh, but this is not a policy. It's just a resolution.
It's a resolution.
Or just a
but-
resolution.
Yeah.
I did submit another policy,
Yeah.
but that's not on this agenda.
Yeah.
What we might do is say, to diversify our staff and faculty now and in the future. It's always difficult to write a resolution by committee.
Oh, yeah.
My least favorite thing to do, so I'm just,
Okay, I have something.
Okay.
So, diversify our staff and faculty now, comma, in light of the SERP going to effect, comma, and in the future.
Does it for me. What do you think, Peter?
fine.
There you go.
Anyone else want to wordsmith?
No, my
Angie, do you have that?
Yes, it's recorded, so definitely I have it.
My only thinking, and I had emailed Dr. Beebe about this, is the Santa Barbara Unified School District a couple years ago when Dr. Cash, they did a lot of work with cultural proficiency, and they were looking at closing achievement gaps and having a very high EL, lower SES population in the community. And that the view then was, even though he had said, we're still committed to hiring high-quality teachers, they made a very bold statement they wanted to have bilingual teachers. Now, I don't know that a bilingual teacher is a better reading teacher than my colleague who is white and is actually culturally proficient and has spent time abroad and had many other characteristics that you would think would embody someone that would be in front of children, at least in Santa Barbara. So I don't know if somewhere on this we can say, yes, this is definitely the research shows and this is important, but that we can write in there that we are committed to hiring high-quality individuals. So if you're a fantastic math teacher that's taught math at the high school for 15 years and you happen to be white and you now want to be in our faculty, we're not going to overlook you because someone of an underrepresented ethnic group is applying, but you are qualified, but you happen to be white. And so I wouldn't want to discourage that amazing math teacher from applying because they're going to think they're not going to get the job. And again, I know the research with the mirrors, the windows, I get all that, so I understand all of this. But I also know some of my most amazing mentors are women that are white in their 50s and don't look like me, didn't grow up like me, and have spoken into my life and have, been able to counsel or do whatnot. And so I don't know, it's kind of, this is it's a tricky situation, but I don't want, to read in The Independent or to hear, oh, Santa Barbara City College is gonna only hire people of color. No, we understand in an educated way the research behind what this does to our students, how they can connect. I know when I had a negative experience here at the college with someone that didn't look like me, I was able to walk into the OPS office, even though I wasn't an OPS student, talk to Manuel. He got me back on track because he knew my culture, Okay, but then I also was able to talk to Kathy Adams, who is from the middle. I don't know, she grew up somewhere in the middle of California. Looks nothing like me. Amazing woman, has a heart for our students, was an amazing supporter of TAB. So I don't know if that fits in here, but I would be comfortable with just starting with something like we're committed to hiring the most highly qualified individual because we don't discriminate already on sex, race, or any of that stuff. But knowing what we know about just the demographics of California, the research and and all that, we're not.
Okay, what about in the therefore paragraph? It says, therefore, let it be resolved, Santa Barbara Community College District Board of Trustees reaffirms its established commitment to an excellent and diverse staff and faculty?
I don't
Does
know,
that
to
help?
hire the highest quality applicants. I mean, we want to hire the highest quality. We get, I don't know, every time we've heard of job openings and, HR's here, we get a lot of applications, right? I mean, we're a sought after institution. For most disciplines. Right, for most. And so I think that and also, I mean, it is something I think about this, but I think, okay, so now the Santa Barbara Unified School District is going to hire bilingual teachers. Okay, well, it took a lot of us a while to get up the ranks, right? So if you're a first-gen student 25 years ago, they had to put a program in place, first of all, 25 years ago to help your parents to get you to college. So maybe now we're seeing the fruit of the upper bound students getting their PhDs. Okay, so maybe now we're going to start to see some of these. But in the past, I also think, too, now we want to represent our STEM majors. Well, if students aren't getting into STEM, they're probably not going to teach in the STEM fields because we haven't educated them. So that also is something that we have to be aware that this is going to be a process. So the better we get at putting your kids through community college to transfer, to major in these things, then they will take on the jobs that then will look like the mayors in their communities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, highest qualified is a complex judgment, and I don't think we as a board want to get into the details on that
I don't know. I just want to say, I don't know. Jonathan, go.
Yeah, so I'm looking for that kind of high qualified or excellent.
Yeah, I don't know the wording, but I just wanted
Yeah.
something along the lines that if you're the qualified person, you're in.
Our board policy already says that the district is committed to employing qualified administrators, faculty, and staff members who are dedicated to diversity, equity, and student success. Maybe something like that?
Yeah, because it goes directly from that policy, just how you have it in the 700.
I think that's not quite the same as encouraging diversity. I mean, it's close, but to me,
Maybe
it's a
it
little
doesn't
different.
belong here. If you guys don't feel it doesn't belong, it's fine. I just don't want someone looking at this and saying, oh, the Santa Barbara School District, and I remember talking to a board member, the angle that the reporter took in that story was not what the board intended. It was not what the president intended. And for some reason, that's how the community took it. And I don't want anybody going out thinking that now we're just going to zone in on this. Because that's not our intent, right? It is based on sound research and what we believe is going to be good for the campus. And if you guys don't feel like that needs to be in there, people will just get it, then that's fine too. Fortunately, 4 years ago, they didn't get it, and that was our local school district.
Well, and a commitment to a highly qualified and diverse, does that do
good.
it?
Yeah, let's do that.
Does that help?
If you guys think, I'm bringing it up as a think aloud. And if you guys don't think it needs to be in there, then it doesn't. If you guys think, no, this is silly, people aren't going to think that, then.
Well, people can misinterpret, there's no doubt about it. The question is whether you're helping them not misinterpret. And obviously, we're looking for high-quality teachers as well as diversity.
Well, it may be obvious, but,
Right.
the talk and what I've heard since I've been associated here in this position is that we're looking for the very best, not just qualified, but we're looking for the very best. And now, I appreciate what you just said, Veronica. What I see developing here in the future, like maybe a couple decades out, and I won't be sitting here then, I'm pretty sure. It's almost like separate but equal, which is as bad as or worse than what we have right now. I think it's fine to put this down. I think we need to encourage students to come here and to participate and to learn. But when they graduate, they need to really know their stuff. You can go to some schools and get a degree and not know your stuff. I had to hire people for a major national corporation, international company, and I had to start with people that had bachelor's degrees. And I'd hire some of these guys and they couldn't even compose a business letter. In fact, some of them didn't have readable handwriting, so they did all their memos, they printed everything because they couldn't write. They didn't succeed. But when you set the standards, you could create things. I don't think we're facing those serious ends right now, but I think that our policy should keep those things in mind, that our graduates, not just the teachers, our graduates need to be among the best. And are we changing our goal? We want to have an integrated field of graduates, and we want integrated teachers, and we want to do this all with the finest, top, professors and employees. And indeed, that's what we're trying to do. So I'm not going to I'd vote against this, but I'm not, and then again, I might, because I just don't like how it's put together, and I don't feel like it really addresses what's really here. It's sort of like following along with what the state has set and what their goals are, and we're going to do this too because it's the thing to do and where we should go. And I make these comments not because I'm not for diversity, and I'm very much for the diversity. I just think it's gray, and I think it can be misunderstood, and I don't want to vote on it until I've had more time to think about it in detail. And to think about it in detail, I need to listen to my colleagues and what they're saying, and I've heard some good things here. I don't want to vote on this right now.
Peter?
Maybe this would help. I think the intent of the resolution is to raise awareness, raise consciousness, because I think in the hiring process, sometimes we forget that there are colors in the room other than mine. But I don't think anything about this resolution would set aside a primary focus on excellence, on competence. I really appreciate what Veronica said. I mean, I hadn't thought of it, and you tickled my gray matter to really consider it. And it's really true. Sometimes, I guess my worry would be we could overreact and hire someone less competent but of the right color. The record should show that this debate said that's not the case. We are interested in hiring the very best, most qualified person for the job, and we have to be aware that there is this study that says, in the absence of persons of color on campus, students will not be able to feel that level of comfort that enables them to learn. So to my mind, it is simply a tickler. It is a matter of raising awareness that diversity is something that we should take into account at each step of the way.
Marianne?
I want to echo one of Peter's comments. This has come up not because of our individual beliefs or philosophy. This has come up because there are at least two that I've read, very clear research projects which say college students learn better if they have some exposure or mentoring by people of the same race. I mean, they are that clear. And being a college student is hard work under any circumstance. And anything we can do to help them learn better that is both ethical and morally appropriate seems like something we should do. The wording of this, however, is very tricky. This is probably the 20th discussion on this I have lived through in my short life, and I know that it's tricky. So I'm wondering if it might be wise for us to continue the discussion, but not take a vote until all of us have seen it in writing as it is being presented, modified from what it is today.
I think that makes perfect sense from several standpoints. First, it will give us a chance to refine and revise. And secondly, it keeps the conversation going, which is precisely the intent of the resolution.
Amen.
And so I'm all in favor of it.
Jonathan, are you
Yeah,
good
I'm
with
happy
that?
to delay till
Okay.
next meeting.
We'll put it off, we'll bring it back next meeting. We'll incorporate the suggested revisions so far. Everyone will get an additional chance to think about it. But I think both Peter and Mary Ann have said important things about why we're looking at this at all, as Jonathan did in his introduction and Dr. Beebe. There are studies here that support the importance to student success of having a diverse faculty and staff. And so that factors in a way that we don't want to be specific about, but it does factor in these hiring process, decision-making, et cetera, which is necessarily complex and difficult. So I don't feel badly that we're trying to address this. I think it's important. I think it's really a good thing to be talking about. But I think I would feel badly if we couldn't come to some version.
So do we have a process, by which this can happen that would involve the Vice President for Human Resources, for example? I would think that her input to the resolution would be very helpful.
Well, I would suggest we have a on-the-fly revision that Angie can put together. And we could ask Dr. Beebe to circulate it to folks he thinks would have helpful input and see if somebody wants to make further suggestions. That could include our human resources, of course, and other folks who may have, a different kind of take on it. And then presumably something, either what we've just talked about or what we've talked about with a couple of suggestions will come back next meeting.
That's fine.
Okay?
That works.
All right,
That
there we go. So we will postpone till next meeting, and I don't think we need to vote on that. Now we get to the consent agenda. And I think folks are pretty familiar with this process. We only have a couple of items that would be part of the consent agenda today, which is just human resources items. But there is one of them, 8.1, that we should probably pull just for you to make comments on.
Yes, I would like to do that. That would be a good idea.
Okay. So that leaves 8.2, experts and volunteers for the consent agenda. Does anyone want to pull that one?
Why do we need to have a consent agenda if we only
Because
have two
we're-
issues and we want to pull one? Why don't we just vote on them both and get it over with?
Because we have a process, and we're following our process here. We could always wind
now
up
we have to
pulling,
make three
we could wind up pulling everything if we wanted to. That's part of the process. So that leaves us with a consent agenda, as you pointed out, of one. So may I have a motion to approve 8.2? Or our consent agenda, same thing? Greg?
I make a
You
motion to
move?
approve 8.2.
Okay, anyone second?
Second?
Okay, Marty second. Any comments on that one? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. All right, so 8.1, Anthony, you're going to make a comment on that.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on this. This is a rare and unusual occasion of a faculty member, Dr. Heather Rose of the Biological Sciences, that's asking to rescind a previously board-approved retirement. And this really is an exceptional situation. And there are several criteria that must be met before I, as your superintendent president, will even bring this kind of a situation to you. And I wanted to kind of just chat a bit about what those criteria are. First of all, obviously the individual can't be retired, so that'd be one thing, and that's the situation here. The scheduled retiree must also put in writing to the executive vice president, set out reasons why he or she is asking for a rescission of the retirement that's been previously approved. Also, in my view, it really shouldn't be coming much later or any later than January 31st, just in terms of our being able to plan for a retirement like this for a faculty member. I also have had situations in the past where scheduled retirees will put in there for their retirement and then pull it back, put it in, pull it back. And so one of the criterion for me is that the scheduled retiree has never made such a request of the board or of the college. Also that there hasn't been a recruitment process or a formal job announcement that's gone out to replace the scheduled retiree. Obviously that would cause some consternation. The scheduled retiree would also be reinstated in the same position, in the same department, and have the same load, essentially whatever that would be determined by the department. So it wouldn't be some kind of gaming of the system where they can do this and come back for whatever reason it may be under some other kind of a position and some other kind of load. And then finally, an important criterion for me is that the program chair, the division dean, the executive vice president, and myself, having reviewed this potential reinstatement, all agree that this is in the best interest of the program and the college. And I've looked at all of these criterion in detail and had discussions with the executive vice president, and Dr. Heather Rose's situation meets all of these criteria. And as a result, I'm asking the board to approve her retirement to be rescinded.
And in your view, this would be pretty unusual?
Very unusual. Very unusual set of circumstances.
Okay.
I think we've had one instance in my memory in the last 6 or 7 years where that's happened, and there were, I think the basic criteria that you've outlined were the criteria that we made use of in one way or another to approve that rescission. So I move approval.
Anyone second? Greg second. Any other questions, comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And that brings us to the end. I just wanted to note before we adjourn that under our to-be-scheduled list, we will have our February 9th board meeting, which is the early-in-the-month meeting like this one where you may have more discussions and less business, and the February 10th board retreat. So we might begin some of the discussion February 9th, depending on how things are looking, and leading into the board retreat. And also in to be scheduled, we have, per Marty's suggestion, changed the reference to international students to student mix, and we'll be talking about that at the retreat, as well as the overarching theme of our retreat, which will be FICMAT follow-up, and following up on a number of things that were recommended for the board to consider and ultimately decide in that report. So with that, I think we are adjourned. Thank you.
You're right.
No.